Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. All right, tonight we're going to have an interesting conversation with somebody that you might not agree with, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. We're here to learn from each other, explore new ideas. We're going to be talking to Ted Rall. He is a syndicated political cartoonist, columnist, Pulitzer Prize finalist, winner of the RFK Journalism Award, and the author of a new book called What's Left? Radical Solutions for Radical Problems, which is available May 1st. Ted Rall is a socialist, and he's got more socialist ideas. The book, however, is really about the breakdown of the left, the breakdown of, there's just on the left, as we've seen with the Democratic Party, it's in mayhem. They have terrible ratings. A lot of people on the left, people who are left-leaning or Democrats are not even voting because the party sucks so bad. And so this is a breakdown of what is the left. So the book has it's a play on words, right? What's left? So that's what's left of the left, the Democratic Party being in shambles, but also what's left, like what is leftism? And that is what we're going to be getting into today. What is leftism? For many of you that reject it, you say, I hate it. It's terrible. It's Marxist. It's communist. These people are just going to destroy America. Maybe you're right, but I think it's good to listen to somebody who comes from that world and hear their breakdown of what it is. Tonight, he's going to be going over some of the differences between communists, socialists, left libertarians, left anarchists, progressives, and others. There's many different factions of the left, just like there are on the right with libertarians and the corporate, the neocons and whatnot. There's various different types of right wing people as well. So we're going to be breaking down the various different types of left, and also importantly, we're going to cover tonight where the two sides are the same. A lot of people just want to demonize the other. Any idea that comes from one or the other, they just automatically knee-jerk reaction is, I hate it. I don't want anything to do with it. It's evil, without actually thinking it through. And the reality is the true left and the true right, I would say the populist left, the populist right that has risen up since 2016, the Bernie Sanders and the Trump movement, have a lot more in common than they do differences. But a lot of that gets ignored. So tonight, Ted and I are going to go over the commonalities, the differences, and also the differences between the types of leftists out there and where the Democratic Party went so completely wrong. Ted Rall, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kim. It's good to be here.
Okay, so let's first start off with the fact that you say that there's no real left political movement or party in the United States. There are some in other countries, but not here in this country. A lot of conservatives watching this show are going to disagree with you, Ted. And they're going to say, what are you talking about? The Democrats, they're all left. They're leftists. They're crazies. They're communists. They're socialists. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say, I would ask them, do they think that the right is ably represented by the Republican Party? I would say that the MAGA movement kind of shows that many, many people on the right do not feel like the GOP previous to Donald Trump really represented the populist right. So equivalently, the people on the left who push, for example, are anti-imperialism, anti-foreign intervention, stuff that many people on the right would agree with. There's no home for them in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a militaristic party that votes with the Republicans in favor of every single National Defense Authorization Act. They are completely in the pockets of corporate America. They take giant donations from transnational banks. This is not the party of the left. A party of the left would not have left the minimum wage at $7.25 since 2009, the way the Democratic Party has. A party of the left would not have failed to push through legalized abortion when it had the chance to do so under Obama, when he had a 60-vote supermajority in the U.S. Senate and said it wasn't a priority. A party of the left would be pushing for radical environmental moves. It would have moved to, for example, ban SUVs, say that we can have cars with 50 miles per gallon minimum gas mileage. Why don't we have that? Because the Democratic Party has never pushed for that. Detroit wouldn't even really mind. They'd still be making money. So I can go on, but I think the problem is that the left has been defined out of existence in the media, and in the spaces of like presidential debates and so on. I mean, you look at the last time that someone who was sort of a leftist participated in a presidential debate was Ralph Nader many years ago. And he's not even that far left. He's definitely a leftist, but he's not even a radical leftist. Bernie Sanders is about as far left as it gets these days in mainstream politics. We saw what the Democratic Party and the DNC did to him not once, but twice. And basically, what are his politics? The same as George McGovern's or Hubert Humphrey's in 1968. Identical. No difference whatsoever. And he supports and voted for funding of Israel's war in Gaza and so on. I mean, so the Democratic Party under Joe Biden, who's the last time we had a Democratic president, supported Israel in bombing Syria and Gaza and invading the West Bank and so on. A leftist party is in favor of Palestinian liberation, and it's in favor of national self-determination by all peoples around the world. A left-wing party does not want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money on 800 plus military bases around the world while we have people sleeping outside. The party of the left is not going to be content with 13 weeks of unemployment benefits when you lose your job, when the average time that an American is out of work when they lose their job through no fault of their own is over a year. I mean, the point is that these are, we can argue, and leftists do argue about what the left is. But what the left certainly is not is the Democratic Party. Now, what's happened in the past historically is that the Democratic Party used to rely a lot on its left wing, the people who to the left of it, for its ideas. And again, we can sort of look at an analogy here. If you look at the intellectual right and all the energy that comes into the Republican Party in terms of new ideas, new personalities, and all those, they come from outside the GOP. They come from intellectuals on the far right. And then the sort of most mainstream ideas, the ones that are viewed as most likely to prevail, they kind of get poached by the mainstream conservatives in the GOP. Well, that's how it used to work for Democrats. The New Deal, it was mainly poached from a bunch of left-wing ideas. I collect political buttons. I have political buttons from the Communist Party from the 1920s that say, hey, we should have unemployment insurance. FDR comes along in the 1930s and says, in a depression, hey, we should have unemployment insurance, and rips off the socialists and takes a bunch of their ideas. That was pretty much the deal until the 1960s. The new left was still feeding people and ideas into the Democratic Party. But starting in the 1970s under Jimmy Carter, but particularly once the Clintons came into office in the early 90s, they completely revolutionized the fundraising process of the Democratic Party and decided to kneecap and cut loose anything that smelled of the left of the Democratic Party. It became about control. They would rather lose with Hillary Clinton than win with Bernie Sanders. Donald Trump himself said that Bernie would have defeated him. He was much more worried about Bernie than he was worried about Hillary. But what happened? The DNC is absolutely determined to keep the left out. And you see this on the editorial pages of the New York Times and other places where Democrats hold sway. It's it's not really an intelligent move, and I suppose we'll get to the problems with the Democrats later on. But that's why you're kind of like, it's important for us on the left to define ourselves, to say, hey, we're real, we're here, we're Americans, we care about the country just as much as everybody else, we exist. And according to the Gallup poll, and you can look this up, they ask every single year, the Gallup poll asks Americans, do you have a favorable view of socialism and or capitalism? Every year, about 40% of Americans say they have a favorable view of socialism. Some of them, there's some overlap, and say they also have, some of these same people also have a favorable view of capitalism. But the point is, this is a country that's been through 2 Red Scares, McCarthyism. There's no left-wingers allowed to basically be in the Congress or to be on the editorial pages of major newspapers or on cable news. No real left-wingers. So it's not surprising that nobody knows we're out here, but we are. And a lot of us would be more likely to vote. Last election, 7 to 10 million people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 didn't vote for Kamala Harris in 2024. A lot of those are left-wingers, people who care about what's going on in Gaza and other places around the world, and feel that corporate Democrats like Kamala are not going to represent their interests. So they don't like Donald Trump either. He's too far right for them. So they sit on their hands. Some of them voted for Trump in 2016 because they agreed with his policies on trade, and they agree with economic nationalism, which is also traditionally has been a thing that left-wingers cared about too. American jobs, America first, that was a left-wing thing, something that labor unions cared about, radical left-wing parties cared about. But, we're homeless politically, at least in electoral politics.
Well, a lot of people who voted for Bernie Sanders ended up voting for Donald Trump. And so a question I have is, when you describe the populist left that rallied around Bernie Sanders, liked Bernie Sanders' policies, what is the difference in your mind between a populist left versus the populist right? Because there's a lot of overlap there.
There is some overlap, and sometimes I've been accused of being a Trumpy because, I'll say things like, hey, I don't think we should be funding Ukraine against Russia and so on. I think we should I want Trump and Putin to sit down and make nice. Lots of stuff like that, right? It's like, well, you're pro-Trump. No, it's not like that at all. The overlaps are putting the country first instead of global interests, right? Like, if you are, we might not like the nation state system, some of us who are internationalists on the left, but that's the system that we've been living under for 175 years. It's not likely to go away anytime soon, as long as we have it. I don't understand how, and I think many people on the right would agree with me, I don't see how, if a single American is having problems paying their bills, I don't see how we send a single bullet to another country, a single bag of food to another country. I don't understand why we do foreign aid at all when people in our own country aren't well off. If we have all our problems fixed, if Americans are, you get sick, you're not worried because you have a great healthcare system. If you're, not worried about sending your kid to college because it's free, everything's cool, all our problems are solved. Sure, let's start sharing with the rest of the world. But that's far from the case, right? So there's overlap there. The MAGA movement, which I think is descended directly from the Pat Buchanan branch of the Republican Party, the America First branch, they also have some similarities. I've often read Buchanan's old magazine that he co-founded, right, American Conservative, and I'm like, wow, I agree with like 75% of this. Yeah. And it's like, that's weird. I could probably write for it and probably get along great. Because it's also like that skepticism of foreign interventionism. Like most of the time when we're picking sides in foreign conflicts, we don't know what the hell we're doing. We end up, either through stupidity or evil, choosing the wrong side and getting destroyed. I mean, we're talking this week. It's the 50th anniversary of America's defeat in Vietnam. The Vietnamese won. They kicked our butts 6 ways till Sunday. A bunch of guys in black pajamas. They won. And we've never taken that lesson, right? We've never understood the hubris that led to that. We shouldn't have been there. The Vietnamese didn't want us there. They didn't need us there. They're fine without us. Now, we're welcome to come back as tourists. That's how it should be. And I think, there's overlap there. The differences, I think, are on issues of how you treat individuals. Like, for example, I think it's entirely possible to say, borders should be closed. And by the way, I agree that, you're not a nation state unless you guard your borders and you know who comes in and who comes out. Yeah. That's just a fact. That's not a left-wing, right-wing issue. That's just history. What is a nation state? It's a plot of land where the people who live there can, by force of arms, decide who comes in and who comes out, and they can protect it. That's what it is. And so you don't have that if you have millions of people crossing without permission. So that's silly. But on the other hand, if someone does sneak across the border because we're not really guarding it, and they're just looking for a better life, is it really right to scoop them up and abuse them, deprive them of due process, send them to an internment camp, deprive them of being present for the birth of their child, and so on? No, it's not, because individual rights, and I hope my conservative friends agree with me about this, individual rights are super important, whether they belong to an American citizen or to an undocumented worker. And I think that there's a need. I mean, I think the big gap between left and right, as I see it in this country, is in this idea of what you're entitled to as a citizen. I think that if you're a citizen of the wealthiest country in the world that's ever existed in the history of mankind, that you're entitled to the basic necessities of life just for being alive: shelter, food, clean water, transportation, education, and healthcare. You're entitled to those things. You don't have to work for them. You can be lazy. You can be worthless. You're a human being. You get those things. And like everything extra, whether you get to go on vacation, buy nice clothes, drive a cool car, that's on you. And it's up to luck and the marketplace and so on. But I think that's, and I think there's too many people on the right who are basically like, well, if you get sick and you have a terrible cancer, sucks to be you. And I don't know. I don't think that's like, I don't think that's society. I think that's some sort of like Afghanistan during the Civil War, a crazy libertarian Mad Max nightmare.
Mm-hmm. I think that might be a bit of a straw man of their argument. I think that the right, I think their fundamental argument is that it privatized systems that are not run by the government, that are not provided to everybody, just de facto run smoother. I think they're just thinking that more people would have access if government stayed out of it, if free market had the control over it. And I think that's I don't think it's, tough luck, life sucks for you. I don't think that's their actual argument, but I get your point. So it's interesting, though, that you bring up Pat Buchanan. I agree. 75% of, if the populist left and the populist right got together, I think that they would find that they do agree 75%. Yet what's interesting is the country doesn't run on any of that, on any of the 75% that the people agree with, which is that America First mentality that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump both ran on in 2016. Right, this close the borders. Even Bernie ran on that. Like, well, we shouldn't be letting people in. We need to, because it lowers wages. We have to keep our wages high. We have to keep looking out for the people, for the American people. So both of them ran on close the borders up, guard the borders. Both of them ran on the ending of these transnational trade deals. They both ran on these were crappy deals. And they harm the working class in America. We offshored all of these jobs, and both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders said that was a giant mistake. Both of them say stop the foreign intervention. I mean, I know Bernie changed. So did Trump, though. For both of them changed from their 2016 messaging. But just going back to that 2016 messaging, there was a ton of overlap between those two. And then it just left that, like you said, that last 25% of maybe disagreement. And I think you lay it out pretty well, which is, what is it that you're entitled to as a citizen from the wealth of your nation? Now, the oil-rich countries give their citizens a lot for being oil-rich. Mm-hmm. Even Alaska, as a state, gives their citizens some of the wealth that the state brings in. And the Gulf states do give a lot of wealth to their citizens that they bring in. When we do it, it's viewed as socialism. It's viewed as handouts rather than sharing in the prosperity that the country built, that the country that we live in built, being lucky to be born here. We're all told when we're kids, I don't know if you were told this, I just remember being told all the time in school, you're so lucky to be born in America. You're so fortunate to be born here. Kids are born in other places, and you were born in the greatest place on earth, and you're just so fortunate. And then, then you look at it and you say, okay, but what makes me fortunate to be born here? Like, what is it specifically? And the Gulf state citizens would say, yeah, they were fortunate to live there because they get provided for from the oil money, provides very well for them in a lot of the places. So it's an interesting point you bring up. So it's just a matter in your mind more of what is it that the role of the government, what government should be providing for its citizens And you're thinking that the right wants to provide less and the left wants to provide a bit more. And that would be the difference, the fundamental difference between the two, would you say?
Yeah, I think look. Unfortunately, there's negative commonalities between the left and the right. Like both of them seem to like their own free speech, but not anyone else's.
Right.
That's a serious problem. I always, I'm with Voltaire. I'll defend your right to say what I hate what you say, but I'll fight to the death to defend it. But most people aren't like that, and but I do think it's basically about individual rights, and I think there's a bigger vision difference between the left and the right too. In terms of how they see America. People on the left, the real left, not the Democratic Party, I think tend to see the country as a place of individual rights. So maybe that's the right to, worship as you want, or have your gender identity respected, blah, 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 your individual rights. Whereas I think a lot of people on the right, not everybody, they like and value the idea of America as an empire, as a powerful global entity, a hegemon, a country that has an immense cultural and military capital, power that can, and I think right now we're seeing Trump, for example, really playing into that, where he's saying like, look, why do we have unfair trade deals? We've been paying for everyone else. We have this massive consumer base. People should be paying us more. And he's not entirely wrong, right? So, he's tapping into something that is real. But I think that's what, that's the main difference. Yeah.
I actually think that there might be that same difference on both for both of them. When you look at like the empire, the expansion, the right might say it in a way that you're describing, but the left also says it. They just say it in a different way. They're saying things like, we need to spread democracy, right? That's what the left started.
Yeah, that's liberalism. Yeah, that's liberalism, and it's neoconservatism, which came out of liberalism, right? They're all lapsed Democrats, the neocons. I don't think it's our business to tell other countries how to live their lives, what kind of form of government to have. You can just look at what's happened I mentioned Afghanistan. For 20 years, we were over there. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. We tried, and you can have an influence. You can occupy a country for 20 years. And when you leave, there's some pizzerias, terrible pizzerias. There's English signs in English and in Dari, all over the place. You can leave things. But fundamentally, you can't change the people unless they want to change. If women are going to be out of burqas, they're going to have to rise up with the help of their husbands and their brothers and their sons, and they're going to have to insist on that they don't want that anymore. It's not something that the U.S. can or should try to impose from the outside. We wouldn't like it if any country were trying to tell us how to live, what to do, how to dress, how to talk. We wouldn't like it. Nobody likes it. It doesn't work. As much, and it's not like we have all the answers anyway.
Yeah. Well, you can't crack the egg for the chick, right? You've got to let them do it on their own, because that's the only way that they're going to actually sustain it and live beyond once they get out of there. But I think, when you also describe the right, I think this is such an important conversation to break down and understand the differences between the right and the left, because there's just so much confusion. And I think there's a lot of people on both sides that are just pointing the fingers at the other and just saying, well, you're just evil. You're just bad. You're a right winger, so you're bad, or you're lefty, and so you're bad.
True.
Right? It's not true. I mean, there's just so much overlap. There's so much that both sides agree on. And but when it comes to, Trump right now is kind of talking this more, we want to take Greenland. We want to make Canada a state. I mean, there's a lot of ridiculousness there. We want to take Gaza and rebuild it. And I actually think a lot of people on the right, that populist right that voted for him in 2016 and this time around, they're fighting back on that. They don't like that. They don't want that. They're very America first. And so they don't want to see war with Iran. They don't want to see us taking land, especially a bunch of Canadians. I mean, are you kidding me? They have the population of California, and they're all going to vote Democrat, every last one of them. We make them a citizen of this country, you'll never see a Republican Party rise up again. The Canadians will go Democrat. It's just going to be Democrat through and through.
Unless he occupies it the way the Israelis occupy the occupied territories, and we don't let them vote. and it'll
Yeah,
be fine.
yeah. Well, then the Canadians who all have guns, they'll rise up and they'll take their country back and they'll say, "Screw you, we're not doing that." And then also, taking on the Greenlanders who are Danes, and they're getting all of the social programs that the Danish get, which is way more robust than anything we get here in the United States. So what's going to happen to them? I mean, are Americans going to sit back and think it's okay that this territory that we've taken over, that these people are getting all kinds of services that the average American doesn't get, and we're now footing the bill for it? Rather than Denmark, no, let Denmark do it. They're already doing it. Why do we have to take on that? If you're coming at it from a right-wing perspective, right? So I think that's why there's that pushback now on Donald Trump. So I think there's pushback on both sides. I think my point on left and right on these, on the left saying, I hear a lot of Democrat voters now saying, we cannot be the world police. We have to stop this. This is nonsense. We can't keep doing this. This whole idea that we're spreading democracy, bullshit, we're not, right? Things just get worse. So I'm hearing that on the left. And then on the right, I'm hearing that same thing, which is why we're just continuing to get into these never-ending foreign wars and foreign entanglements because military-industrial complex or Israel wants us to, and we need to knock it off. So I think both sides want to be more isolationist.
100%. I mean, I remember learning about isolationism in civics class in high school, and it was taught like, and this was a terrible thing. I remember thinking to myself, what's so bad about it? What's so bad about isolationism? Yes, I know that the counterfactual is World War II. But let's face it, we didn't go into World War II because we wanted to save, Jews from ovens. We went there to open up European markets for American goods. And that's the truth. Now, it's one of those wars that it ended up having some great effects. We defeated Imperial Japan and we defeated Nazi Germany. But that wasn't really the point.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, that wasn't the point, because it wasn't. Okay, so looking at the differences, the left wants bigger government. I think this is fundamentally what it does come down to. I know that there's a lot of chatter and, like I said, finger pointing and blaming of being evil to each other. But fundamentally, what you're breaking down is that it boils down to the size and the role of government. So the left, there would be a lot of the same shared populist ideas, but the left would want a bigger government with more involvement in those social services, whereas the right would say very little government involvement, just to each their own. Would I think be a fundamental difference?
The problem with to each his own or her own is that we're a social species, right? We're the fourth species of chimpanzee. We need each other. We can't really live on our own. We need help to get by when we're very young, when we're very old, when we're sick, when we're infirm, when we're down on our luck. I mean, what's reality, right? Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or whatever, if you lose your job and you're broke, how do you get by? You ask a friend to crash on their sofa. You borrow money from your friends and your relatives. And what is that? That's a form of basically local socialism. And you could say, well, okay, so Ted, that's why we don't need government, because we can all help each other in our own little pods. Well, the problem is not everybody has a little pod, right? I mean, some people, their parents are gone, they don't have siblings, whatever. I mean, no two situations are exactly the same. I always like to think about something I learned about desert cultures. Desert cultures, like in Saudi Arabia, Turkmenistan, places like that, they have a tradition of hospitality. And it's really important when you live in a place that's got a harsh climate, no water, there's sandstorms, that basically there's a tradition that if you need to, you can knock on any house and people will take you in and feed you and give you water and a place to stay until until the sandstorm blows away. If you don't have that system, everyone pretty much dies, because at some point everyone's caught out in the sandstorm. So that's kind of like a metaphor for how society needs to work. Unfortunately, in a modern age, we need a lot of things. We can't really, most of us who live in cities, I'm here in Manhattan, I can't grow my own food. I know how, I just can't. It's like, so I need to be able to use money to buy food from farmers who make it. We're all intertwined. And I think, the process of politics is about discussing, what should society do for you? And, I think we also have a practical question that goes beyond ethics or even ideology, which is with increasing automation and artificial intelligence replacing jobs, they don't need, the powers that be don't need us as much as they used to as workers. When I was a kid, the worker participation rate was about 74%. Now it's 63%. That means that's the number of people who the Bureau of Labor Statistics considers to be part of the available for work economy. That number is going to continue to drop. Elon Musk has talked about this at length. And you know what? When we watched the early Star Trek series, right? They would sometimes land on a planet where it's like nobody works. No, our technology does everything for us now. We can taste that. We're so close to it, and not everybody's not going to. We're not going to. We're not at a place where nobody has to work. Far from it. But we're basically at a place where only about half of us need to work, and so, we can't really have a society. It's not viable if 50% of the country is sleeping outside because we've tied their ability to eat and drink and take care of themselves to a salary that no matter how hard they look and how hard they work and how many night classes they take, they can't get, right? Mm-hmm. It's not going to work. So we're going to be, when you go outside in that society, it will be Mad Max. It will be dangerous. It will be frightening. I live in New York City. It is dangerous and frightening now. It's like the 1980s again. Every subway car is dangerous. You do not want to be out on the street. There's homeless people, deranged people, and that'll just keep getting worse and worse. So I think, this was a very 19th century model. Everybody get a job at some factory, whatever, and then you'll subsist. And, if you're really smart, you can save a little money and maybe invest wisely and maybe leave some money for your kids and you'll keep prospering. But that model is over because we've become so productive as individuals, and there just isn't a need, not to mention we have a declining birth rate. So our consumer market is dropping, something Musk has talked about also. The average American couple only has 1.7 kids. You need 2.1 just to stay even with population, and you need to have more than 2.1 if you want to get that continuous 2 to 3% increase in GDP that our economic model requires to not plunge into a recession or a depression. So it's about keeping everything balanced in a workable way. It's not even a question of kumbaya, I love everybody. I'm an introvert. I don't love everybody. I'm just saying this doesn't really work.
What would you say are the differences between communists? You write in your book that there are many strains of leftists: communists, socialists, left libertarians, left anarchists, progressives, and others. Their goals differ in some respects, but the primary defining characteristics of these variations are identical. If the left were 100% in charge of everything, there would be no rich or poor. Everyone would have equal access to everything. Giant corporations would not exist. No one would want for the basic necessities of life like housing, food, and medical care. Everyone would be unconditionally entitled to those by virtue of existing as a living, breathing human being. I got to be honest, this paragraph right here turns off a lot of people. I think that a lot of people are saying, what do you mean there would be no rich or no poor? What do you mean that the government basically would be providing all of these things? We have not really seen, honestly, a really good working example of communism, for example. Like, it fails.
That's true.
Each time that it's implemented. So why would you then want to advocate for something that sounds a lot like that when it's always failed?
Well, first of all, only one government has ever claimed to be a communist government, and that was Kampuchea under Pol Pot. He claimed to have achieved communism. All the other, what we call really existing socialist governments, like the USSR and socialist Cuba and so on, those countries they themselves said, we're trying to build socialism, right? So nobody claimed to have achieved communism. Part of the confusion is that they had communist parties, but that doesn't mean they had a communist system, right? So if you look at, there's definitely things to learn from all of these governments. Like, the Soviet Union had some problems. In terms of I went to the Soviet Union in the 1980s, tried to get a cab outside my hotel. I go knock on the window of this guy. He's smoking and he tells me to like F off because he gets paid whether he takes me somewhere the same or as if he sits there in the car smoking and drinking vodka.
Right.
Obviously, he'd rather do that. He had that was a system that had problems with motivation. Although on the other hand, they could get scientists to work for the same as a coal miner because the scientists and they did a great job. I mean, Soviet physicists were the best in the world because they wanted the medal and they wanted the DACA and they wanted to be on the front page of Pravda, having been a hero of the Soviet Union, right? So there are things that do work beyond financial remuneration in terms of motivating people. Mr. Kalashnikov, after whom the famous AK-47 is named, if he was an American gun inventor, he would be worth billions of dollars, possibly, potentially, if he was able to exploit his invention. He made nothing. He got some medals. He was very happy with that because he considered that his weapon had become incredibly successful, the most successful small arm in the world, and he was proud of what he did. He didn't need to live any way that other than he did modestly. In the Soviet Union,
the cab driver's not looking for a medal, right? I mean, that works for science. That works for inventions. Yeah. It works for science. It works for people that are motivated by achievement because and you're right, there is many other motivators than money. I've certainly always been somebody not motivated by money, really. So I get it. I'm motivated by other things, success, achievement. People might want medals, like Olympians. They're not doing it for the money necessarily. They're doing it because they want to reach that achievement. Why do people break the Guinness Book of World Records? They don't do it for any. There are these motivating things. Sure, the glory, but the cab driver sitting there smoking and drinking his vodka is not looking for a medal, right? So he doesn't. What motivates that guy? Money is the only thing that would motivate that guy, and he's not getting any. So down the drain it goes.
But I mean, people tend to look at regimes like that, and they look at the problems, like, there were market shelves that didn't always have every type of vegetable or whatever. Okay, well, the United States, after we collapse, people will say, well, there were all sorts of problems with the United States. There were periods when you couldn't buy toilet paper or paper towels. I recently went to Trader Joe's and I was only allowed to buy one dozen eggs, right? There's lots of problems here in the United States too. And so what you try to do is you say, okay, but there's things that the U.S. does right. There's things that these old socialist regimes did right. And you try to, take those and you try to synthesize them. I mean, you don't just put on blinders and say, okay, well, this is, we believe should be, can't be like the Democratic Party and say, basically keep running the same kind of candidates all the time and eventually it'll work out. I mean, that's a religion. That's a blind faith. That's just not scientific thinking. It's not rational.
So then what is the solution? So let's go over some of the differences. What's the difference between communists and socialists?
Well, so in traditional Marxist theory, right, socialism is a path toward some kind of idealistic 1,000 years from now communist era where the state falls away and everybody's living completely, in this sort of a utopian civilization that nobody can imagine right now because everybody's brains will have been so rewired to no longer want to acquire individual wealth, and everyone will be more concerned about the collective good, and that's how it'll all work. Okay, I can't imagine that personally. So, and I'm not going to be here in 1,000 years.
Right.
So therefore,
we'd have to become aliens. I mean, that's just not. It goes against the fundamental. And one of the reasons why I'm not for communism at all is it goes against fundamental human nature. I mean, we cannot change our nature as human beings.
We are both individual and acquisitive and greedy, but we're also generous and communitarian and helpful. Right. We're both. We have both of those impulses. And I think a smart regime or a smart form of government or economic system tries to feed into both of those impulses. It provides the basic necessities of life. We're not Mali here. We're rich. We can afford these basic things. And at the same time, it gives people an incentive to, like that cab driver in Moscow, to, get off his ass and go pick up some fares and get some tips, right? Mm-hmm. So that maybe he can like move into a bigger apartment with it or whatever. So, or buy a better type of vodka or whatever he wants to do with his extra money.
Right.
So I mean, you do want to do both. So anyway, the difference is basically socialism is just the idea that people are entitled to certain things just by virtue of being a citizen in that society, right? And then left libertarianism.
Well, wait, just real quick
like
though.
A lighter touch.
But socialism is meant to be a vehicle towards communism. It's not really meant to be its standalone political ideology. Is that right?
Normally, it's you're supposed to be constantly building. And I think my analysis, and I've read a lot of traditional like Maoist and Lenin and all that stuff. And my takeaway from all this is they didn't really believe we would ever achieve communism. They didn't think that. These were very, intelligent, cynical, hard-bitten dudes. They were all dudes, except for Rosa Luxemburg. And they basically decided to, but I think it's sort of like that idea, like when you have a kid, and you tell your kid, you don't go for the B, like you say, go for the A+, and if they fall short and they get the B+, that's good, but shoot for the stars.
Right.
That's what the idea was. Like go, shoot for the perfect communist regime. Otherwise, you're going to be compromising against yourself, which is what you don't want to be doing in general. But look, there's many elements of socialism in American life, right? I mean, any kind of public service is basically a socialist thing. First class mail. It costs the same for me to send a letter to my neighbor down the street in New York City as it does to send a letter to someone who lives in a remote part of northern Montana, which obviously must cost a lot more money to deliver that letter. But why? Because, that person who lives in remote northern Montana, they're part of the grid. And we've decided that it's better that everybody pay the same, and that like basically, there isn't a premium to be, well, just because you live in a different part of the country, you're like a second class citizen. Social security, public education, when you call the fire department and they come and put out your fire, I mean, that's out of your tax dollars, right? I mean, you don't pay them. Fire departments used to be in the early, if you look at the Gangs of New York era, right? They were private. And you had to pay them. They'd show up, and your building is on fire. And if you didn't pay them, they'd either just loot what was left, or they'd just leave, or both. That's not really a great system.
Right. That is not. Same with police. You want them to show up when you need them, and not have them demand payment before they'll actually rescue you.
Precisely.
Yeah. Okay. So left libertarians, left anarchists, progressives. What are the differences there?
Well, so, I mean, I think a progressive is basically just what a liberal used to be. Progressivism kind of has its roots with like Theodore Roosevelt and Robert La Follette and those people from the, 100 years ago. And basically it was like, it's really was anti-corruption, and basically anti-privilege. It was a populist movement, and it was meant to break up party machines. And so a lot of these things don't kind of exist in the same way anymore, but in a way they do. The Democratic Party definitely has local and state and national machines, for example, more so than the Republicans do, but the Republicans do too. And there's just sort of so for progressives, I think it's almost a misnomer to call someone like Bernie Sanders a progressive, or AOC. Those are just liberal Democrats. That's all they are. A progressive is really someone who tends to be from the populist left. A moderate populist left, someone who is America first, wants to close borders, cares about American jobs, doesn't want to spend money overseas, that kind of thing. When you go for like a left libertarians are funny birds. Basically, they believe in a very, very small state, and they don't trust the state, which is smart. No one should trust the state. The state is not trustworthy, as has been proven repeatedly. But the financing mechanism and the organizing isn't there. It's kind of like, I'm not really sure how this works. Left anarchists basically kind of have anarchism is not the same as anarchy. And basically that's all about like local decision making in an egalitarian way. Probably the best example of left anarchism that most people watching us today are familiar with is something like the Occupy movement, that the way that they were structured in a leaderless movement. My opinion is that doesn't work very well. Mm-hmm. Look at Occupy. If you ever attended one of those meetings, with the fingers and all that, it's just like, you need leaders. You just do.
Yeah, I've always I hail from the left. I've always been more of a leftist but I don't identify at all. I mean, I think the Democrats are insane. I can't stand them. I'm definitely happier that Trump won the election than Kamala Harris. Certainly was rooting for that. But when I would say that I'd always been more of a social, I don't know what to call, like whatever Sweden is. What would you call them?
Yeah, they're like democratic socialists.
Democratic socialists, yeah. Okay.
Or social democracy. I think they're called social democracy.
There's still capitalism. You could still go in there and make a ton of money. I mean, look at IKEA, right? The founders of IKEA. Sure. So there's still a lot of money to be made. You can you can get as rich as you want, but they do provide basics for the society so that people aren't stressed out about if they do get cancer, how are they going to, they have children. And then how are they going to get them to daycare or educate them? They don't have to stress out about that. So they're able to have children without stress. They're able to take risks starting businesses without stress because they're not worried about, I do think that it creates a freedom to have a safety net when you have that safety net. And those that have, like myself, for example, the way I was able even to start doing what I'm doing right now, talking politics, having a show like this, I had family that I was able to turn to as sort of a safety net while I got through that period of time where I wasn't going to be making any money at all. And that was freeing. The ability to have that, being able to live with a family member while doing this, that was freeing and allowed me to start my own business. Whereas I know lots of people in my life who want to start their own business, but they don't have anybody to lean on to get through that time period of, we're not going to be making any money, so we're not going to have any food to eat. So we got to go to grandma's house, and they don't have the grandma in order for that safety support. So having that, seeing that in these other countries, they're able to be more innovative. They're able to be more risky. They're able to start businesses because they have a bit of that safety net that is provided for them by the government. But one thing that I've heard from Americans who've lived in Sweden and have come back, and they've lived there for many years, is they say one of the odd downsides to a government that provides. Now, Sweden is not like your typical, what people would think of when they think of communist countries where people get really lazy, like you mentioned, with the cab driver that doesn't want to take you anywhere. Swedes work. They all work really hard. They put in long hours, whatever. But one thing that he said was strange was that there was no sense of charity at all. Like here we have a charity system, too much so. We have to rely on GoFundMe if you get cancer. But we at least have a sense of community and charity. But in Sweden, because no one is cared for, no one is needing anything, they're not, like no one asks, like, do you need anything? Can I help you? There's no sense of rallying around someone when they get ill or when they have a problem. Like nobody rallies because they all know, oh, you're fine. You'll be taken care of. It's no big deal. So they don't have that sense of charity and community, which is kind of interesting, that the side effect of that. But now I would say I've become, since COVID, I would say I'm one of those funny birds. A left libertarian is exactly how I would describe myself, in that I do think that there should be some basic services that are provided by government. I don't want my government to just be police and military. I want my government to actually provide like education. I don't want parents to worry about how they're going to get their kids educated and can they afford a $20,000 private school bill. I want their kids to go to school. But I want it to be done on a very small local level. I don't want it to be done on a federal level. I don't want it, I want it to be done. And so that's what I would say the left libertarian is that small government, local government, that's the government that should be doing it. And then you could choose if you want to live in a different community because your community doesn't provide what you want, you can go to a different one. Or if you don't like that they provide and they take too much from your taxes, you go somewhere else, right? That is what I think a left libertarian is. And I would say I fit in that category.
I have no problem with left libertarians. Many of my best friends are left libertarians. I think there's nothing. Look, I think those are very reasonable. I thought, just a little bit to respond to your observation about the Swedes. It's just a reminder, right, that we're all working on these things, and there's always unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. To even a great system. I mean, most people think that the Scandinavian countries have most things pretty well figured out, but they also have a high suicide rate. For some reason.
Well, that's because they're in the middle of,
alcoholism.
they're in like the dark all the time. I think that's why.
Yeah,
I don't think that
probably
has to do
why.
with their economy or I think that has to do with
Yeah.
just the dreariness of being in the cold.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. So, my point though is that there's no magic. I mean, certainly there's something to be said for, even the sort of school of hard knocks of, the of the hard right, Republican way, like, you're on your own. I mean, there are people who respond to that and they're terrified of failure, so they work 23 hours a day. And they they build something big. And that's not nothing either. So we all have to kind of like, we have to argue about and try to figure out as a society where we want to be. I mean, my book is not about trying to convince the public at large at all about like, how, we should go forward. It's really just about sort of trying to tell the left, like, listen, you guys, if you want to be part of the mix, you have to have a set of ideas. You have to articulate them clearly because nobody knows what the left would do if they came to power, right? The left doesn't know. You see the people in those hands-off rallies. Do they know if, like, let's just say, like, they accidentally were a dog that caught the car and they took over the U.S. government? What would they do? We don't know. They don't know. It's like we need to define those things, and and then maybe the American public writ large isn't interested. Oh well. But I mean, at least these ideas should be in the mix the way they are in every other industrialized country. I mean, we don't even talk about these ideas. There's so many things we never talk about. Like for years, we never talked about free trade agreements. Both parties were in favor of them. George H.W. Bush pushed for NAFTA, and then Clinton pushed it through. The country, there was not a single editorial page that would run, and I know because I'm a columnist and a cartoonist. I was in 140 papers. If I wrote something against NAFTA, it would not get published anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. It's like easier to come out in favor of like child pornography than to write against NAFTA. There's no way. It's like, so I'm just saying, so we need to, as a society, we need to have a more vibrant back and forth.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're calling for is the rising up, for the left to get their messaging straight. I mean, the left is, there's like, I mean, the left is in the shitter right now, right? With 27% approval rating for Democrats. It's just dismal. And there is no messaging, like you've said. There does seem to be like a very radical group that is vocal, that gets all of that makes all the, I mean, and maybe it's on purpose that the establishment media highlights the crazies because they want to make the left, that sort of movement, appear absolutely bonkers and insane. So there's a possibility that's just kind of done on purpose. But there is a lack of messaging there. The right seems to have a better grip on their message. There's definitely a lot of infighting right now in the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I love to see it. I love to see this infighting because it shows that, for one, they've shown to be much more of a democratic party than the Democrats, right? They actually had a democratic process, followed through with it. Trump got elected. Now they're all fighting with each other about intervention versus non-intervention. Israel, no Israel, right? They do this. And it's refreshing to see because it shows that there's still some debate alive somewhere in the political spectrum. Whereas on the Democrat side, you're not allowed. I mean, if you're against they're saying, that's it. You're kicked out, you're shunned, you're silenced, you're smeared, you're buried, right? So you're saying the left needs to take back a message, get a message, make sure it's cohesive and put it out there, and then see if the American people bite.
That's right. And it's going to be outside of the Democratic Party for the exact same reason that you just articulated, right? I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, look, the Democratic Party, they have superdelegates. The Republican Party doesn't have superdelegates. When a insurgent candidate appears, not just Trump, but like Schwarzenegger in the California recall election for governor, the state party bosses, they didn't like Schwarzenegger. They didn't want him. But it was like, he's who the voters want. We're stuck with him. Democrats don't, and he won, right? Because when the voters want someone, they have a better shot at, in the primaries. They have a better shot of prevailing in the fall, and then when the person is picked by party insiders, and they don't really, they're not battle tested and battle hardened. So yeah, no, I mean the Democratic Party is not open to these ideas. They're not open to to discussing the idea that we shouldn't be interfering with all these countries around the world and so on. So therefore, it's time for the left, that 40% or 35% or whatever it is of the potentially voting public, to get it together outside of the Democrats. I mean, I've kind of articulated that if American electoral politics were vibrant, you'd have at least four parties here. I mean, and the two big parties would each split in half, right? You'd have populist, MAGA Republicans versus corporate country club Republicans. Those would split into two different parties. And you'd have progressive Democrats versus corporate Democrats. Those are two parties. And those are four discrete ideological points of view. And there's more, right? I mean, I'm a dual French citizen through my mom. I was born here, but my mom's French. And when I vote, the consulate sends me this sheaf of party propaganda from, France's 34 political parties. There's like 6 communist parties. There's like a bunch, there's Marine Le Pen. There's a bunch of far-right nationalist parties. There's a monarchist party. They would undo the revolution if they could, put the king back on the throne. I mean, the point is this is a country that wants like variety. You want to be able to buy a bunch of different types of car. You want to be able to buy a bunch of different kinds of dishwashing liquid. Why are we stuck with these two crappy parties?
Yeah, it's a great question. Why are we? They've just taken over, and they're feigning democracy for us, saying, "Oh yes, you're a democratic country," but you're right. I mean, we just really don't seem to have democracy at all. We don't seem to have choices. It's very interesting, nope. Ted. I think that this conversation is interesting. Where do you fall, by the way, in the leftist circles? Are you communist, socialist, progressive? What would you call yourself?
I think I'm a socialist, hardcore socialist. I mean, if I could snap my fingers, I would immediately, have everybody earning the same exact amount of money, blah, 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 blah. But, I'm not a dictator. I don't get to snap my fingers and have my way. But I don't believe that someone who does a podcast should earn less than a CEO, and I don't think that a custodian should earn less than someone who does a podcast. I mean, they're all contributing to society in their own respective ways, and there's lots of motivation to do any of those jobs. I mean, I make a lot less money as a political cartoonist than I used to because it's print journalism. I still do it just the same. I care about it just the same. The money, like you said, the money's not that important. As long as I can pay my bills somehow, that's all I care about.
Yeah.
And, but I think that's where I would stand. But where I stand isn't really, that important. Because I'm just one of 330 million Americans. What's important is that we have a really robust set of choices from far left to far right and everything in between to choose from, talk about, engage with intelligently and in an honest way, and not just be like calling each other names and, like the crap we see on the internet. It's a waste of time. We're only here on the planet roughly 80 years each if we're lucky, and we have major problems that need to be resolved like yesterday, like climate change. And it's like, we're not doing anything about it.
Right. Interesting. Well, Ted, thank you so much for being here. This has been, I think, a great conversation. I think a lot of people who are watching and are not on the left and kind of rag on leftists all the time, I think that this is good for them to hear, that there's the variety of think, and also that there is so much commonality. There is some differences, of course, but that's the beauty of being able to vote, right, is to be able to say, well, yeah, I'm not really into that. It's not really my thing, so I'm going to go and vote in a different way. That's the way that it should be, rather than slinging insults at each other and smearing each other because of the political thinking. So the book is What's Left? Radical Solutions for Radical Problems. The book is available. Yeah, there we go. There's the cover. The book is available May 1st. And we do have the link to your website down below so that people can follow you and follow when they can get that book. But I think you're right. The real important thing right now for those who feel like they're on the left, or those who maybe they've even gone along and they've supported Donald Trump up to this point and voted for him, but because they just hate Democrats so much, and they just think, if there was an alternative, I just like this guy better than that guy, and that's the problem. Like Kamala was just so awful. There's, I think, a lot of people that would be interested in a left rising up and seeing what the policies would be, what the platform would be, what the messaging would be, rather than what's gone on now. So I think it's an important message to say, hey, what's left, guys? Right now, not much, but let's define it.
In a two-party system, all that we end up having is we keep flailing, reacting from against whoever has been annoying us for the last 2 to 4 years, and then giving a raised middle finger to them. And that's why, I have lots of friends who are registered Democrats who voted for Donald Trump because they just wanted to send a message to the Democratic Party, stop it. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is that, of course, you can't blame the analysts for saying, oh, look, the country's moving to the right. No, these people who voted for Trump they haven't changed their politics. They're the same people that they were. And conversely, if you have a move to the left, that doesn't mean that the right's disappeared either. The two-party system is fake. It's artificial. It's replacing real politics. It's not a reflection of where the American people are. I don't know where the American people are. Nobody does. Until they have a real chance to choose, we're not going to know.
Ted Rall, thank you again for being here. The links are down below. The book is, once again, What's Left? Radical Solutions for Radical Problems, available May 1st. Ted, thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can check out Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. The show airs live. It is a 1-hour live show Monday through Friday. Just head to KimIversonShow.com. See you there.